Good afternoon. I'm Jamie Tassa, publisher of Corporate Board Member Magazine and Director of Events for Chief Executive Group. Thanks so much for joining us today. If there was previously doubt, 2020 has proven that every company needs to be taking adequate steps to ensure the continuity of their operations, the safety of their employees, and the safeguarding of critical data and applications if disaster strikes. Whether it's COVID-19 pandemic, last week's hurricane through Louisiana, the fires in California, the riots throughout the country. There's a lot at stake when it comes to protecting your most critical assets and employees. While many companies have detailed emergency preparedness plans and business continuity processes in place, the increasing complexity of this unpredictable threat environment that we find ourselves in leaves many companies unable to act fast enough or access the data they need to make the decisive decisions necessary. So that is what we're here to dig into today. And joining me is Michael Collar with the Center for Excellence at Everbridge. We're going to look at, what are some of the threats and what are some companies doing to manage them successfully. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Jamie.
Absolutely. So maybe to start us off, if you can just talk about the nature of threats you see emerging and how they're evolving.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you did a great job of outlining them in the intro there. The biggest one, really coming to no surprise to anybody, is COVID. It's omnipresent worldwide. It's been a true global pandemic for 6 to 9 months now, and it continues to affect everybody around the world, all businesses. But it's also evolving, right? So we see case spikes from time to time that force organizations and governments to take different action. But we're also keenly looking at the economic impacts of the pandemic and how that's going to affect threats globally. And one of those is related to protest and civil unrest activity related to COVID as a potential threat that we see emerging in the future. The second one is tropical storms. Kind of the Northern Atlantic hurricane season is reaching its peak now. It's been very active so far, and we continue to see that really through most of the rest of the year is posing a big threat going forward. Wildfires as well, as you mentioned, but also bushfires in Australia. We tend to see kind of those both really beginning in earnest in September, October. With the traditional weather patterns. So we definitely see that over the course of the next couple of months emerging as a threat. And especially in the US, unrest and protest related activity, and unfortunately from time to time, associated violence. We've seen the tragic events in Wisconsin from just the past few days in the lead up to the US election here in about 2 months, and tensions really rising there. We definitely see that as a threat area to watch.
So what are some of the things that companies fail to think about when they're, doing business continuity and planning or crisis preparedness?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it dovetails nicely from the previous question. It's the first thing is managing multiple crises at once. You can see, companies really preparing, going through the preparedness process, preparing well for certain events, but not necessarily considering how those things are going to interact together and impact their crisis response plans or the business continuity plans. Another thing to consider is Murphy's Law as part of that. Things will go unexpectedly. They will go poorly in a lot of cases. So managing those multiple crises at once and expecting the unexpected are things that companies really need to be thinking about. And I think that it really comes down to culture in this case, and the ability of companies to have a really solid business continuity security mindset and the associated tools for handling all of these. because if you don't have those, that paper at the top, you can prepare for almost any scenario that you think of. But as soon as Murphy's Law kicks in, or you get multiple events happening at once, the cracks start to form, and things start to go kind of out of control for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, so let's expound upon that a little bit. So what are some best practices that the companies who are doing this well, this crisis preparedness well, what do they do that others don't?
Yeah, the first one really, and it sounds a little bit surprising in the year 2020, but the first is really digitization, because we talked to a lot of customers that are still have that actual paper process, where the business continuity plans may have been formed 5 or 10 years ago. They're seen as okay as they are, and they're sitting in a file cabinet somewhere. So we still need to coach our customers on best practices, bringing technology into their business continuity and disaster preparedness processes, because many still aren't. The second one is consolidation. We're seeing this in our marketplace, is the consolidation of providers for these types of solutions, and consolidating and streamlining these processes is really an emerging best practice that we see. We've seen it for the past 5-10 years, and we'll continue to see it into the future as organizations look to execute these plans more efficiently.
That's great. Let's dig into COVID, because pretty much every company, regardless of where they are, is being impacted with that from the standpoint of the growing mobile workforce. So in today's environment, when so many people are working remotely, besides those on the front line, it seems like it would create a whole new set of challenges for trying to ensure the safety of your employees. So what are some things that companies are doing or should be doing on that front?
Well, the big thing we are seeing them doing is starting to treat their distributed workforce, their mobile remote workforce, as actual facilities for business continuity planning and disaster planning. Traditionally, the thought process is when the employee goes home, that's not necessarily something that the company needs to worry about when thinking about disaster planning and business continuity. Now it is, because we've had a couple of customers tell us that they're now treating their remote employees effectively as distribution centers. So they go from a dozen distribution centers out to hundreds or even thousands. So that's a big trend that we've seen in the world of COVID because of remote working.
So kind of on a related but different note, as companies think about bringing all those workforces back into the office, certainly a lot of considerations there on how to do that safely. So what are some critical considerations?
Yeah, the first is really going to be the safety of the workplace, right? It's making sure that the workplace itself is conducive to social distancing, is adhering to the safety and health standards of the local government and the organization in particular. So that's kind of a prerequisite. But then when you actually start bringing people back in, the efficacy of testing or symptom checking, along with contact tracing or trace and track, whatever you want to call it, is really going to be paramount, because person-to-person transmission within a workplace is almost inevitable. At least organizations should treat it as inevitable. So you can have a safe, healthy environment to try to minimize the frequency of COVID in the workplace, but you should treat it as an inevitability. So when it does happen, what are you doing as an organization to mitigate the impact and the spread, and to keep as many of your employees as safe as possible?
That's great. So earlier on, you referenced the need for consolidated data, and obviously Everbridge is in the business of technology. So we know that you're a fan of using technology to help with safety and preparedness. But if you can just talk, generally a little more high level about, what can technology help a company do that they just can't do manually that might, be surprising to people?
Yeah, the first is I guess on the surface not necessarily surprising, but the true impact is, and that's the financial benefits of owning a system like this. It really comes down to process improvement and optimization. It's about running your processes, in this case, business continuity management or disaster planning, disaster response, etc., duty of care in a more efficient way. So when we do workshops, and we'll talk about this in the presentation here in a second, but there are significant financial benefits of using a system in this way and using it well. The second one is the use of a system like this in unexpected, non-defensive ways, I guess is the best way to put it, because people tend to think about these systems as internal defensive mechanisms, right? To ward off the worst of the impact that could happen when something unknown happens. But we've heard our customers in a number of interesting use cases use our systems as more of an offensive capability or a strategic capability. One example is, in this, we've heard from a number of companies, is the ability to use when a tropical system comes through an area, for example. If you're a retailer, you're going to be affected, and so is your competition in the area. Everybody's affected by this tropical event moving through this disaster. If you're able to use this system to stay open longer, reopen sooner, and do so with a more with a supply chain that's more intact and more robust, there's a market share impact to that. So we've heard some success stories along those lines. And we've heard there was one really interesting one that I love to share during these types of stories. And that's an insurer that worked with car dealers. And they worked with the car dealers using our system to anticipate severe weather event, in particular hail, and advised the dealerships when hail systems were approaching. And the dealerships were able to move the cars into shelter, whether that's in the dealerships themselves or into shelter outside somewhere, to mitigate the impact and the damage associated with the hail. And that revolutionized their whole business. They used it in a really strategic manner in order to achieve some really great business outcomes.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's such an important point too about, how can companies go on the offense instead of just always being in defensive mode when it comes to a crisis. And obviously we can't foresee so many of these crises like a national disaster, but if you can think through the scenario planning and have those early detections, it can be extremely beneficial from a strategy standpoint. So that's a great segue into the next portion of today's webinar. So Everbridge commissioned Forrester to conduct an independent study looking again at the total economic impact and the cost and benefits of using different critical event management software. So here to join us to share some of the key findings of that study is Kim Finnerty, who's a consultant with Forrester. And during her presentation, Kim is going to share a few specific examples of 4 companies, including a $50 billion chemical manufacturer, a $5 billion pharmaceutical manufacturer, a $90 billion insurance provider, and a $200 billion retailer, so large companies, with anywhere from 100 to 10,000 sites and facilities, looking at how they have used critical event management in that strategic way to address different scenarios proactively and some of the benefits they found from that. Then following Kim's presentation, Michael is going to come back and share some additional perspectives on where to look for value in a critical event management solution, what metrics to measure, how to measure them, just kind of key considerations of how you can use this approach for your crisis preparedness planning. And he'll have a few additional case studies of both US and UK companies. So we invite you to submit your questions throughout the webinar. Michael and Kim will save some time at the end to answer a few. And then Any questions that don't get answered during the webinar, we will be sure to follow up with you directly after the fact. So definitely submit those as we go. If you have any technical issues during the webinar today, please reach out via the chat function, and the Chief Executive Group team will help address those as soon as possible. So with that, we'll segue over to Kim.
Hi, well, thanks everyone for joining. It's great to be here today and great to share the results of this study with you. I just want to start off by giving everyone a sense of what we'll be covering as we go forward. So I'll start with a little bit of background on Forrester's TEI methodology, and that will give you a sense of where these numbers are coming from. And then I'll share a summary, a top-line summary of findings, and drill down then to talk a little bit more in detail about the specific costs and benefits that we identified. And then finally, I'll leave you with a one-page summary of the total economic impact of the critical event management platform. So I just want to note first that this webinar presentation is a summary of a much more detailed case study. I would really recommend that you download a copy of the study and review it, because it provides a lot more context, more customer input, more quotes, and especially more detail about the assumptions and the calculations that are in the financials I'll share today. So Forrester's TEI, which stands for Total Economic Impact, is a framework that we've been using for many years as a way to make sure that we're looking at all the factors that are important to an investment decision. So obviously that includes costs and benefits, but one of the things that makes the TEI a little different is that we consider both hard and soft sides of those costs and benefits. So hard costs or benefits are those things that can be quantified and they directly impact the company's financial statements. Soft benefits can still be extremely important to the organization, but they aren't directly accounted for in the financial statements. They might be a little bit harder to directly quantify. And then finally, we risk adjust all of the numbers that we use in the study, and that helps everybody to feel confident that other organizations will be able to achieve the same kinds of benefits as the ones that we interviewed. We follow a very well-defined research process to construct the TEI. So we start off with some due diligence up front, where we talk to key stakeholders at the company who's commissioning the study, and we review their sales and marketing materials. But then we really move into the heart of the study, which is speaking directly to the customers and the key executives who've evaluated the technology and who are experiencing its impact now on their business. Then finally, we create a composite organization based on all of the data that we've gathered in these interviews, and we use that to model the financial returns. That gives us the inputs that we can use, and that lets us put together the full case study that we'll walk through today. Just a few things to be aware of. Sorry. Well, this study was commissioned by Everbridge, and they provided us with the customers for our interview. They did not participate in the interviews, and Forrester maintained complete editorial control over the study. And although there clearly is a very positive story here that we're excited to share about you, the study doesn't constitute an endorsement of Everbridge per se. Okay. So just to give you a quick overview of the findings, and then I'll dive a little bit deeper into what we heard from customers. We talked to, as you can see, 4 different companies for this study, and you can see that they cover really a wide range of industries and sizes. It's everything from a $5 billion manufacturer with 7,000 employees to a $200 billion retailer with 300,000 employees. So very different kinds of companies. But despite the differences, all of the organizations experienced similar types of costs and benefits, although obviously at different scales. We used the data that we collected in these interviews to create the composite organization I talked about earlier, and I'll share that with you in a few minutes. What we'll talk about going forward is the impact this platform made on the composite's business operations. Now, I'm sure everyone listening today, out of all of you, very few actually work for a company that fits the profile of any of these four. So that's the idea behind creating the composite and modeling the composite returns instead of just sharing the returns from individual customers. It gives the folks who are reading the study a chance to get into those numbers and start to customize it a little bit and understand what would be the returns that you might experience in your organization. So on a very top line level, what the interviewed organizations told Forrester is that the CEM platform gave them the power to address business risks in a much more proactive manner. So the platform allowed them to identify the risks earlier, it allowed them to have more confidence in the risks that they did identify, and then to put appropriate plans in place to minimize any negative impact. All of this in a more resource appropriate way. In fact, when we used their inputs to create our model, Forrester found that the platform improved the bottom line of the composite organization to the tune of a 235% ROI. And that's based on a little over $9 million worth of benefits to the organization at a cost of just about $2.7 million. And all of that is over the course of the 3 years that we modeled the returns. These are all in present value. And so obviously the net present value of 9.1 minus 2.7 is $6.4 million. That $9 million worth of benefits encompasses a number of different benefits experienced by the organizations after their investment in the platform. So they break out, as you see here, 5 of them. The largest gains really are coming from being able to keep things operating relatively normally during a crisis, whether that's a physical threat like a wildfire or terrorism, or a cyber threat such as a data breach or ransomware. The organizations also experience significant savings due to productivity from using the CEM platform, and that includes productivity across the company as well as productivity within the security team. So I'll talk about that as we go forward as well. So let's jump into that. We find that when people make technology investments, or really any investment, they don't just wake up one morning and say, hey, I think I'll go spend some of the company's money. There's a set of challenges, problems, issues that they're trying to deal with. And 3 of the biggest that we saw in the organizations that we interviewed for this study were, first, the difficulty in identifying critical events quickly. Everyone knows that the faster we can identify these threats, the faster we can confirm that they really are actually threats to our assets and operations, then the faster we can prevent or prepare for them. And one of the key difficulties that many of the security teams had is just the wealth of data that they have available. They're often getting information feeds from all over the globe. The sources range from popular press, CNN, things like that, to highly specific sources and even secretive sort of dark web information feeds. So that's a lot of noise for people to have to sort through as they try to identify relevant risks. With a platform that recognizes the location of the organization's own employees, buildings, trucks, etc., the security analysts can really zero in on the events that matter to the company. The second thing is mass communication issues, and these are a problem for organizations because they can be very time-consuming and error-prone as security teams try to identify who to notify in a particular type of crisis and what to say to them, what information to provide them in order to stay safe or to keep the operations running. Not to mention actually getting those communications to the right people in a timely manner. So those are all things that were an issue for these firms before they got their platforms. And finally, all the organizations we interviewed also had facilities and employees around the world, or at least around the US. So being able to get all those people together at the same time on a physical conference call, and also to be working off the same data and the same situation analysis, that was often taking them much too long and sometimes was not even possible. So what they were looking for in terms of functionality really was the ability to cut down that time that was required to identify and respond to threats, the ability to help those global teams really work together with the same base of information, the ability to bring together physical and cyber security. And this was interesting. We found several of the firms were actively trying to bring their physical and cyber teams together and have them report into one person. And some others were actually trying to keep them separate, wanted to continue keeping them separate. But in either case, they wanted them to be able to have the same base of information, the same kind of approach to risk. And then finally, the ability to make an impact in security immediately, but then be able to scale out quickly as the platform was working for them, right? To be able to add additional geographies or functionality. And the overall results, really what they told us on a high level was they experienced a shift from a reactive to a more proactive stance toward risk as a result of their investment in the CEM platform. The analysts now have time to go beyond chasing down crises. They can get ahead of potential threats. They can start developing plans for what to do. The security teams can communicate much more quickly and effectively. The firm is able to satisfy stakeholders like investors and insurance companies and customers that they have a plan in place to deal with the risks that are inherent in their business. And then finally, they're better able to care for their employees, which is a key function of the organization. So here's just a high profile example of the kind of standard of care that was enabled by the critical event management platform, where, on a very real-time basis, they were able to find someone who was risking walking into a dangerous area and actually stop her and turn her away. So as I mentioned earlier, we used all the data from our interviews to create a representative composite organization as the basis for our financial model. So the detailed slides we'll go through all apply to this organization here. It's a $30 billion global manufacturing company. It has 30,000 employees and 100 facilities. And as you'll see when we get into the calculations, the study provides all the details that will let you start thinking about how your organization might benefit from this investment, right? You'll be able to take a look and say, okay, I only have 50 facilities, or I have 10,000 facilities. I'm much smaller, I'm much larger. You'll be able to scale some of that information using the calculations that are provided in the study. So as you'll recall, there were 5 key benefits that we quantified for the platform, some that related more to hard cost savings and others that were more about productivity improvements. So the first one, and the largest, that contributed $2.7 million over the course of the 3 years, was reducing losses from business interruption. And here we're talking about the effects a critical event can have on regular business operations. The platform helped the composite organization to reduce its unplanned manufacturing downtime due to things like hurricanes, floods, wildfires, power grid damage, things like that. So for events that are more predictable, say hurricanes, the organization found that they were able to prepare in advance, and they had more confidence and certainty about whether their operations were likely to be affected. So they were able to move ahead quickly and with purpose to make preparations. For some of the less predictable events, things like wildfires or civil unrest, the team could at least identify the issue quickly as it was happening and take emergency measures, because they weren't constantly dealing with false positives and distractions. Aside from the regular operational downtime, the interviewed organizations were also able to use the platform to reduce their IT downtime by quickly identifying incursions and allowing the team to isolate those endpoints to contain the spread. So one of the interviewees told us, right now, a lot of it is manual, but the CEM platform allows us to automate it. It sees the alert, creates an incident in the platform, and quarantines the machine virtually instantaneously. So that really helps them to, to stop the spread before it gets out of control. Avoided property damage costs is another large $2 million savings over the course of the 3 years. And we tend to think about property damage as pertaining to buildings, but of course it also includes inventory inside distribution centers, which might be temperature controlled, as well as materials that are in transit, either from your organization or through your organization. So, one global head of security told us if our supply chains are interrupted, product inventory in transit could be lost because it isn't kept at a controlled temperature. A single dose of one of our medications costs around $18,000. So obviously that's an issue that adds up quickly for them. We had another head of security tell us during Tropical Storm Imelda, we were able to alert our people to a bridge out on I-10 before there was any media reporting at all. With the platform, we picked it up on social media and we confirmed it with DOT cameras. And we've had a number of incidents like this where we worked with our supply chain group to reroute goods in transit. So clearly a lot of opportunities there to protect the company's assets. You can see how having a reliable information available quickly can really help avoid all kinds of property damage and loss. The platform also helps organizations account for the losses that do occur. So for instance, if buildings or inventory are damaged in flooding associated with a tropical storm that made landfall, far away several days ago, that's still associated with that incident. So those losses can potentially all be recognized as part of the same incident when filing a claim or just accounting for those losses in financial statements. So turning to productivity, this first productivity measure is really about the productivity of employees throughout the organization during critical event situations. The most reliable of these measures to talk about or to quantify is weather. So we focused in the study on quantifying the productivity gains due to weather, because the government keeps data on how much work people miss every year as a result of bad weather. So it's very easy to sort of source that information. The real number is probably quite a bit larger than this, because of course the same kind of factors would apply to something like wildfires or civil unrest, where people are not sure whether they should come to work the next day, or where they might get caught up in traffic issues or things like that that result in being very late or missing the whole day. Because the platform provides reliable, up-to-date information on all these kinds of events, employers can make the call early and communicate it quickly so that people who can work from home are prepared to take their laptops and files and things like that home with them. And even those who can't work from home may be provided with alternate routes to avoid closed roads, things like that. Most of the organizations found that their notification frequency went up dramatically at the beginning of the rollout, but then settled back down at a level that was somewhere between the amount of notifications they used to put out and the immediate post-rollout number. And all of them really felt that they had achieved the right level of notification at this level, because the employees were now much more likely to pay heed to the notifications because they could see that they were accurate over time. And because the notifications also contained appropriate instructions and were sent to the appropriate people, people had a lot more confidence that when they received a notification, they needed to pay attention to it and they needed to do what was being suggested. This benefit speaks more specifically to the productivity within the security team. So the ability to do their jobs better and more efficiently. Overall, we had one person telling us the Everbridge tool allows for automating low-value administrative work that currently has to be manually done and assigned to people who have other, I guess, more important tasks. And I think, we'd all agree that tasks like keeping employees safe and, saving inventory in transit are more important than your average administrative task. But in the upfront phase of identifying the threats, we had one director of risk telling us we had multiple risk alert platforms and the alerts came also via email. So we would receive emails, then we had to bounce around 2 or 3 different platforms to get the information we needed to do an initial triage of the event. So you can see, as I was talking about before, that wealth of information really can kind of slow the team down, and having the platform that can help them sort through that and help them pinpoint the relevant risks really provides a lot of productivity for the team. On the back end, in terms of the phase of communicating quickly and accurately, this could really be accomplished virtually at the push of a button now. Before that, one of our global heads of security said it could be life and death, and people in remote offices are looking for their continuity plan and reading it page by page, typing up notifications, and sometimes having to get them translated into multiple languages. So again, one of the benefits of this platform is to have pre-templated notifications that talk about what is to be done in any kind of situation, any kind of critical event, so that really in the middle of the emergency, people don't need to be thinking about who am I going to send this to and what exactly am I going to tell them. They just hit the button and off it goes. So all of that provides again more productivity for the security team, and that was worth about 1.1 million over the 3 years. There are some benefits to using the platform that are less quantifiable. So on a high level, we had, one of the folks telling us right at the beginning of our interview, there are some quantitative metrics and some things like what we're touching on here in this interview, but there's a huge qualitative piece to what we're getting. A better quality of reporting, better speed of notification, all of those things, and that's being recognized at the highest levels of the company. So that was making a huge difference in their organization. 3 of those kind of less quantifiable benefits are, first of all, this, really fulfilling the duty of care to employees. This is becoming more of an expectation for companies, especially global companies who have employees at all levels traveling into and through areas where there could be civil unrest or other dangers. 2 of the interviewed organizations also have employees who actually travel into people's homes to provide treatments and the like, and being able to ensure their safety and whereabouts is really very reassuring for the employees as well as for the company. In terms of this additional employee benefit idea, one of the interviewees told us that that their organization actually uses the platform as a selling point for employees, both as they're recruiting and as they're talking to employees throughout the year about the benefits that the company provides them. And what they do is they offer to include the employees' home addresses and family travel plans in the assets that are being monitored. So as a result, employees and their families receive similar kinds of emergency notifications and protections in case of threats to their home or interruptions in their vacation travel, that kind of thing. And then finally, the third less quantified benefit is just the idea that the company has taken a more proactive stance. This proactive approach to risk really reassures investors, vendors, customers, anyone who wants to see that the organization really has an approach to mitigating risk. The interviewees universally believed that the proactive stance really improved their attractiveness. So of course, all benefits come with a cost, and the same is true for the platform we're talking about. And there were really 3 types of costs that we looked at here. First of all, the bulk, as you can see, of the costs were coming from subscription fees. These vary both with the number of employees and the breadth of capabilities that a company chooses to deploy on the platform. But the cost of a subscription that would be able to provide all the benefits we've talked about here for the composite organization, which you'll recall has 30,000 employees and 100 facilities, is about $2.6 million over the 3 years of the analysis. The second cost is in administrative oversight of the platform, which we estimated, having talked to all of these organizations about how they manage their platform, we estimated it at about 1/3 of an FTE. So a cost overall of just about $150,000 over the 3 years. And then finally, the training costs for the security team so that they can use the platform well. These are minimal, really. It primarily involves the internal cost of the time that those employees spend in a training session or getting up into speed on the job. So that was estimated at about 17,000 over the 3 years. So a total present value cost then of $2.7 million over the 3 years of the analysis. And that is the total economic impact of the critical event platform. Thanks so much for listening. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael now.
All right, thank you, Kim. That was very insightful, and we appreciate the thorough and impartial work done by Forrester to put together that study. Greetings, everyone. Again, my name is Michael Collar, and I'm part of Everbridge's CEM Business Solutions Center of Excellence. Part of our mandate at the COE is to work with our customers to understand where and how they want to improve their critical event management and helping them quantify the net return of that investment in a process that we call the CEM Business Value Assessment, or BVA. Building on the foundation constructed by Kim and the Forrester team with the TEI report, I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so highlighting ways to apply that same type of analysis to your organization and make more informed decisions and improve your team's critical event management. So the main takeaways from this section here will be the following. First, I want to illuminate where to look for value of the CEM solutions. Kim talked about several areas, but I just want to augment that with a few additional areas from our own experience. Next, once you know where to look for value, I will highlight what to measure to compile the proper metrics for this type of assessment. And finally, third, we'll look at how your teams can compile these measurements with a few techniques that we use in our own workshops with customers. I'll talk about all three of these areas in the context of actual business value assessments conducted with our customers during past workshops and share the results of these workshops. At Everbridge, business value assessments are most often conducted as part of CEM workshops, which are free, bespoke consulting sessions held with our customers and prospects. During these sessions, members of our COE, sales, and account management teams sit down with customer operational and finance points of contact to evaluate their CEM use cases and determine areas and processes in need of improvement, as well as the financial and business benefits of enacting those improvements. The CEM workshop starts with an exercise to determine the baseline capabilities of the organization via a CEM maturity assessment. This 5 to 10 minute multiple choice questionnaire illuminates how an organization is performing in critical event management relative to their peers and recommends areas of improvement. With this assessment as a baseline, we dive into the recommendations of the report to determine the organization's desired state for critical event management. The difference between the baseline current state and the set desired state is what we call the capabilities gap. And we evaluate how to close this gap during the rest of the CEM workshop. The ultimate output of this exercise is a platform-agnostic list of recommendations that the organization should enact to improve their CEM maturity to the desired state, as well as the business value assessment of enacting these recommendations. So before I highlight some of the outcomes of these business value assessments, I do want to share some of the baseline information from the 200+ respondents who have taken the CEM maturity assessment to date. This assessment is broken into 4 sections, each evaluating the 4 main steps followed by any critical event management process, whether it's purchased from Everbridge or done in-house. The first is assess, where organizations discover or are alerted to risk events that could impact their business and/or the safety and security of their people. The second step is locate, where the organization identifies or is alerted to the stakeholders, assets, and people that could be impacted by this event. Once this overlap between event and assets is confirmed, the organization must act in step 3 to mitigate the impact of the critical event. And once fully mitigated, the final step for any organization in this process is to analyze their performance and evaluate areas of continued improvement. So looking at 4 of the industry baselines in the graph, we see some interesting patterns for our customers in the financial services, the US federal government, healthcare, and manufacturing spaces. The first is the shape of the curves, this peak, trough pattern. It's very common for responding organizations to score comparatively better on the assess and act steps in the maturity assessment, and comparatively worse in the locate and analyze steps 2 and 4. The second pattern to note is the clustering of these curves between scores of 2.0 and 3.0, which we gauge to be a reactive capability to critical events. And this is considerably lower than the proactive and optimized levels achieved by scoring 4.0 and 5.0 respectively. Together, these patterns tell us that while organizations tend to understand that they need to improve steps 2 and 4, their mean time to act and their after action capabilities, for example, considerable improvements need to be made across the board to develop an efficient and unified approach to critical event management, which will elevate all 4 of these scores beyond this reactive range. With that foundation of how we begin our CEM workshops, let's look at some actual BVA outcomes in 4 specific case studies. The first study is from a large US-based restaurant chain. The key result desired by the organization was to reduce their IT downtime, a common use case we'd see, and one detailed well by Kim in the Forrester TEI study. During our workshop, we used a common technique called simulation whiteboard, where we openly collaborate with the customer to deliver to evaluate step by step their current response to a simulated critical event. At each step, we drill down into the people, procedures, and tools used, the flow of information, the time taken to act, etc. Basically dissect the entire critical event step by step. We also evaluate alternatives for each step of the process that could improve the operational response of the team or teams involved. Once this whiteboarding is completed for each step, we sum together the business value benefits of the chosen improvements, whether it be reduced downtime, increased efficiency, eliminated opportunity cost, vendor consolidation benefits, etc., to calculate the total business value assessment outcome. In this example, we were able to determine that the adoption of Everbridge's IT alerting tool would reduce the mean time to act during the rally and response phase of IT incidents for this company from 20 minutes down to just 3 minutes, a 7x improvement in response time. This process improvement resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars in cost avoidance per incident, and when spread across the calendar year, totaled an annual savings of over $3 million. In the second example, from a UK-based financial services company, we evaluated how to reduce losses resulting from business interruptions, another key result detailed in the TEI report. In this case, critical events were impacting the physical locations worldwide, overlapping the use cases of corporate security, employee duty of care, and business continuity management. This is an interesting example because the company was not able to disclose many of the key metrics we typically evaluate during a business value assessment. So we chose to use an innovative BVA technique that involved forecasting critical event frequency and applying benchmarks to determine the financial impact of CEM improvement. We first used historical reporting capabilities available in the Everbridge CEM platform to form sort of a risk heat map surrounding each of the organization's tier 1 locations globally. We then applied a conservative critical event probability of 1%, that is assuming only 1% of risk events in proximity to these locations would actually trigger a critical event, to formulate an estimate of the number of critical events the company would need to react to during a given year. Next, we simulated various critical events to determine that the organization was likely to improve their processes by at least 20% by upgrading to a unified CEM platform like Everbridge's. This was done using a similar whiteboard technique I described in the previous slide. Next, we simulated various critical events using that whiteboarding. However, we were unable to specify the exact costs of these past critical events. So we used an independent industry benchmark from the 2018 BCI Continuity and Resilience Report that estimates the average cost of to the enterprise of a critical event to be around $350,000. So factoring these three measurements together, the average cost of a critical event, the expected process improvements, and the estimated frequency of critical events, we were able to project an annual net benefit for this company of $1.1 million. These next two case studies venture outside of the typical results we look for in a CEM business value assessment, but I did want to share them as further inspiration for areas of business value resulting from improved critical event management. Kim talked about a couple of those in terms of employee retention, et cetera. So I wanted to further expand the scope of this exercise. In this case, a multinational energy company was losing sales due to the reputational effect of poor management of their previous critical events. These lost sales were attributed to the negative reputational impact of outages that were caused when the company was unable to transport technical experts to required sites due to critical events affecting employee travel. Reverse that, in other words, this organization's inability to predict and mitigate the impact of travel-related critical events resulted directly in lost revenue and lost sales. The technique for this particular BVA was pretty straightforward because we had accurate information on the processes in need of improvement and a financial impact of acting. Using an after-action style review of the past events, we projected the company would be able to recapture $4.8 million in lost sales annually to these types of reputational issues by upgrading to a travel-enhanced CEM platform. And finally, I'll end today with a case study that we are actually still working to complete. This is from a large US retailer that sought most of the other process improvements that we discussed thus far, but also had a particularly keen interest in using a unified CEM platform to capture more market share and better serve their communities by staying open longer and reopening sooner before and immediately following the passage of hurricanes. As an existing Everbridge customer, this organization used our CEM supply chain module to predict which stores were most at risk from storms as they approached and needed to stock up on critical inventories of food and medicine for the community as those storms moved inland. The organization also used CEM Platform to optimally position trucks with additional inventory for rapid deployment as needed as the storm passed, which I thought was just a fantastic idea. While we are still working to compile the full business value assessment, the company has recorded increases in life critical inventories, community goodwill, and market share in association with these events as a direct result of enhanced critical event management. In conclusion, I hope the details into our CEM workshops, the accompanying business value assessments, as well as these real-life case studies provide this group of senior business leaders with additional insights and tools in determining the full returns on investments made into critical event management. If you're interested in conducting a CEM workshop at your organization, do feel free to reach out to Everbridge with that. And with that, Kim, I see we have time for just a few questions. I see here, it looks like this first one can be for you. Where does Forrester source its assumptions for the model for the TEI study?
Good question. So yeah, there's a few different places, but primarily the inputs are coming from the customers that we interview. And we conduct very thorough, extensive interviews with these folks. They spend a fair amount of time with us. We speak with several different customers, several different organizations, so that we can really get a good picture of kind of the range of experiences. But then we also do check into some other kinds of statistics, like I mentioned, the government statistics on missing work due to weather, or things about insurance claims on property damage, things like that. There are places where, we can ground some of those data points in published statistics from the government or from industry, or even from Forrester itself.
Okay, fantastic, thanks. The second one coming in, I think I'll take this one. I oversee a smaller organization than the composite organization referenced in the TEI study. What are some best practices I can use to build a business case? Frankly speaking, you can use the TEI report. As Kim mentioned, the point of the composite organization is to be able to scale up and down to meet your organization and still get insights from that report, even if your organization doesn't meet exactly the composite organization that was detailed. But beyond that, conducting your own business case is really a successful one is predicated on two big things. The first is a detailed look at your current operations, and the second is a robust alternatives analysis, looking at combined what you're doing today and what you could be doing better and what alternatives are out there. The most important things, of course, in a business case like this is to be thinking critically, to not take any processes or tools for granted. Next would be think about not only the primary results of these processes and these tools, but the secondary, tertiary, et cetera, down the line, to really get a full scope understanding of the impacts of your current processes, the benefits that they result in, and perhaps some cost. And I think the last bit, the last recommendation I have is to engage the right people as part of this process. When we engage in our CEM workshops, the two main owners that we want for each step is the operational owner, the person actually responsible for enacting that process, as well as the financial owner of that process. So who understands the deep financials of that process. And together we can get kind of that mixture of the operational and the financial impact in our business value assessments. Okay. Kim, I'll put this next one to you as well. You mentioned risk in calculations earlier on. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so, one of the things that we want to do, because as Michael was saying, we are trying to create a document that folks can use to try and at least start thinking about how these numbers might apply to their own organization, is we want to try and understand how likely it is that anybody else reading the report is going to have these same kinds of benefits, and at the same level, let's say. So when we speak with the customers, one of the things that we do in the interview is to speak to them specifically about what risks they were concerned about when they were evaluating the technology, what were some of the things maybe they wish they knew, when they were in that evaluation stage, and also talk to them about, whether they feel their organizations are unusual in some way, right? So if they've just told us that they had this, a huge multi-million-dollar benefit from doing a particular thing, is that something other organizations like them would be likely to do, or is that something that's just, fairly, fairly specific to them? We use all of that information, as well as the amount of variation that we see between the different customers we talk to come up with a risk factor that we put against each one of the benefits, and you can see that in the calculations within the larger study. So that gives us a sense, if there's a lot of variation, some people are telling us it's a small benefit, others are saying it's huge, then there's going to be a fairly large risk assessment put against that in the calculations. If everyone seems to consistently agree on the size and type of the benefit, then that's going to have less of a risk. So again, it's there to give you a sense of whether you will probably also be able to achieve those same benefits.
Great, thanks, Kim. Okay, we have time for one more question, and it looks like a perfect one to end it with. I'd like to take an Everbridge CEM maturity assessment. So not really a question, a request. So like I said, if you want to take one of those, please reach out to Everbridge. The best way to do this, I think, would be for existing Everbridge customers to contact their existing account manager or account executive. If you're not an Everbridge customer, but you are in contact with one of our account executives, do reach out to that account executive. and they'll guide you along in the process. Those of you new to Everbridge, feel free to just visit everbridge.com. There are a number of touch points where we can reach out to you, or you can contact us, and we can get you started on the process. Okay, it looks like we are out of time. Kim, thank you so much again for your presentation and for the insights. Thanks to Forrester for compiling this robust report, and to the audience, thanks to all of you for attending. Take care and stay safe.
Bye, everyone.